this will be difficult for you to see, but with water-soluble thread in the needle, I've already stitched my placement stitch. And again, that was water-soluble thread in the needle, just regular embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin. Step 2 is your optional step, is where you can take your wool, piece of wool batting. I've already have it pressed around the edges so that the presser foot of my machine doesn't get caught in it. And you're going to take that, and we tell you exactly what size to cut it with the pressed edges. And then go ahead and, continuing with the water-soluble thread, you can sew the zigzag stitch to attach this to your battleizer. Step 3, we're going to sew placement stitches over the top of the wool batting. If you skip that wool batting part, you can just sew this right onto your battleizer. I have my presser foot in the highest position that my machine will allow it to go, and I'm just ahead of the needle, just kind of pressing down on the batting so that the foot doesn't get caught. And again, putting your presser foot in the highest position your machine will allow will also help to avoid any of that. For step 4, we're going to use our fabric 1. Now we have two rectangles of fabric 1. We're going to use the larger one. I still have my water-soluble thread in the needle, and you can see how I have that placed on there. And then you're going to sew a tack down stitch. And then I'm going to trim 1/4 of an inch inside the block and leave that 1/2 inch of fabric on the outside of the block. Okay, so I have trimmed my fabric 1 away, and you're going to need to keep this because you will be using it later on in the next step or two. My scissors, and then we're going to take our fabric 5, which for me is this cute little pink and gold polka dot, and we're going to lay it right side down, raw edges even. You might want to take a quick little peek to be able to make sure that when you do flip it that you have the entire area right there covered. So I have also changed out my thread to be just a neutral thread and the needle only, and I'm going to sew a seam. Okay, my seam is completed. I have changed my thread to just a neutral thread. You're going to flip this fabric right side up. And if you noticed in the step before this that when it tacked down your fabric 1, it also did a water-soluble stitch that was right there. You probably wondered what that was. That is just a guideline for where we're going to make our tuck. So we are going to fold our fabric so that the fold of it is going to line up perfectly. I'm going to finger press it with that stitch that took place over the top of fabric 1. And then with the water-soluble thread, we're going to go ahead and it's going to stitch that down. Step 7, we are going to smooth out this fabric, and it's going to sew a tack down stitch and also placement stitch for a second tuck. Okay, step 8, we have another placement stitch for the second tuck. So let me do my fold. Finger press that, and I have neutral thread in the needle, and I'm going to stitch that tuck down. I thought it flipped forward on me for a second, but we are good. And now I'm going to trim this to 1/4 of an inch seam. Okay, I have my fabric all trimmed up, and now for step 9, we are taking the remainder piece of fabric 1 and we are going to lay it right side down. Raw edges even, we're leaving the pleat folded onto itself. And again, a quick check to make sure that after you have your seam, that when you flip it, that you've entirely covered this area. So now with my neutral thread in the needle, I'm going to go ahead and have it stitch the seam. And step 10 is just flipping that fabric one over, right side up, and again making sure you've covered this corner. And doing a quick finger press, and we're sewing a tack down with neutral thread. And now with my hoop scissors, I'm going to trim that up to a nice clean 1/4 of an inch seam. Step 11, the machine stitch is a real pretty embroidery motif on both sides of the green fabric of our fabric one. One of the things we're going to have to do with this first tuck is pretty much get it out of the way so it can stitch the embroidery. It doesn't go right up to the seam, but it goes pretty close, so we need to make sure that that is out of the way while it's stitching. So I have my handy dandy Wonder tape, and it's a double-sided water-soluble tape. I have it stuck to the inside of that pink fabric. I'll peel away that, and I'm going to just, this will be easily removed later, so we're just going to take our pink fabric and just get it out of the way of fabric one. I have my thread D in the needle, and I still have my embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin. And so now we're going to stitch the embroidery motif, and we won't have to worry about that pleat getting stuck. I have my thread cutter off, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the machine and cut my thread tail. Okay, we are on step 12. I have my embroidery finished. I've also removed the Wonder tape from here, and I can let that pleat fall down. When you add the rest of the fabric, you want the pleats going away from each other. So now that this Wonder tape I peeled off, I'm going to go ahead and place it so that the second pleat is laying down onto the green fabric. And looks like this one might be a little bit stubborn. It's most important right up in the seam area, so that when the next piece of fabric is stitched, that stays down. So here is my fabric 2. I'm going to lay it right side down, raw edges even, and with neutral thread in the needle, just checking that pleat, I'm going to go ahead and sew a seam. Step 13, I'm going to do a tack down stitch. So I'm going to flip over my fabric 2, I'm going to finger press it, and I'm going to sew a tack down stitch. For step 14, I have my thread E in the needle only. I still have my embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin because I don't have my backing fabric on. And we're going to sew this hunter star points. Step 15, I have neutral thread in the needle. I have my fabric 1 right side down, raw edges even, and we're going to stitch a seam. Step 16, we're going to flip that right side up. We're going to finger press and smooth it out, and we're going to sew a tack down stitch. And now I'm going to trim to a 1/4 of an inch seam. Okay, I've trimmed to 1/4 inch seam. The next step, believe it or not, if you've done Hoop Sisters before, you're probably thinking you need to add that final piece of fabric on there. We're doing a little bit of a twist to this one because we want the stitching that we're going to do with the rest of the Burbs section, we want it to show on the back. So we're going to actually add our backing fabric right now. And to do that, again, if you're doing the piece backing, you can refer to your instructions and it'll show you where to place fabric 1 and fabric 2 on your half square triangles. If you're just doing a normal piece of backing, then that is where you can spray it with little temporary spray adhesive over a trash can if you want to. And then make sure that there's 1/2 inch all around there, and just gently, don't push too hard because you don't want anything to stretch or come loose in the hoop. Put your backing fabric on, carefully turn your hoop over, and then you can do a pat because this is even with the hard surface that you have it on. Then we're going to take it to the machine, and with water-soluble thread it's going to do a basting stitch around the perimeter, and that will hold the backing fabric on. Okay, I did a quick peek underneath the hoop, and there's no Dunlops over there, so we know that our backing fabric is where it needs to be. And now this is where, with water-soluble thread, we sew the backing onto the back of your block. Right, now step 18, we are going to add that final piece of fabric on the front. So I have it laying right side down, raw edges even. I have neutral thread in the needle, and I'm sewing a seam. And the next few steps will kind of be repeating the same motion. Oh, and by the way, I also have the same matching thread. It wasn't a neutral thread, it was actually a thread A. It's in both the needle and in the bobbin because we have our backing fabric on now. Step 19, I have flipped my fabric right side up. I brought my bobbin thread to the top, and I'm going to sew some quilting. Alright, I have taken my hoop off the machine. We have our first row of bubble quilting. Now it's time for our first pleat. And what you're going to do is you're going to take your fabric and you're just going to finger press a fold so that it goes about halfway through all those bubbles. So it'll be a little wider at the top and go narrower towards the bottom. So then just give it a finger press. And then when you get back to the machine, step 20, it's going to sew that pleat down. So let's take it to the machine and sew our pleat down. Alright, we're sewing the pleat down, still using the thread A in the needle end in the bobbin. And then what you're going to do, you're going to smooth the fabric out. In step 21, it does another tack down and more bubble quilting. Okay, our bubble quilting is completed for step 21. Step 22 is to make another pleat. I'm going to do it on my machine this time. My advice would be make sure that you have a hard surface underneath the hoop. Don't try and push it down or make that finger press pleat unless you have something supporting it. So if you don't have any surface on the bed of your machine, take it off the machine carefully and go put it on a flat surface. So let me do my fold halfway through the bubble quilting, and I'll give it a finger press. And step 22, it's going to do a tack down stitch. Got a little piece of fuzz on there. There we go. So again, we still have thread A and the needle end in the bobbin, and we're going to go ahead and do that tack down stitch to complete our second pleat. And step 23 is another tack down, holding it in place, and also another row of bubble quilting. Step 24 is make another pleat. My arms are too short. Okay, make another pleat and still using thread A. And smooth it out. Step 25, tack down, stitch, and more bubble quilting. "26 is your final pleat. Man, my arms do need to be a little bit longer. This will be a blooper mixed in with the movie for you. Alright, so I have my fabric finger pressed halfway up into the bubbles, and step 26, I'm going to sew a tack down stitch. And for step 27, it's going to do bubble quilting, and then it's going to also do some quilting up here in this fabric 1 area. For step 28, I have my thread B, which for me is pink, and the needle end in the bobbin. And I'll bring that bobbin thread to the top so the back looks pretty, and it'll sew some quilting. For step 29, we have our thread F and the needle end in the bobbin, and it's going to force these pleats. It's going to sew a stitch that'll make these pleats lay in different angles. That gives it kind of a nice textural look. It's going to go that direction, which is the natural fall of the pleats, and then the second row, it's going to do it 3 times, but the second row it'll come down, and you're going to have to just slow down the machine and finger press it so that the pleats will lay in the opposite direction. The third row, it will again go in the natural direction of the pleats. So I've slowed down my machine, and let's just sew our first couple of lines here. You don't really have to hold them very much the first time around, but the second time around, going to want to get your fingers in there and make sure those pleats are laying in the opposite direction. And then the final one, the pleats are just naturally laying where they need to lay in the third one. This is an optional step. It's something you don't have to do. But since it's optional, I did want to show that to you. For step 30, I have embroidery, bobbin thread in the bobbin, and a water-soluble thread on the top. And this corner here needs to be tacked down so that we can, it'll be kind of a nice way to aid us in trimming the block with the trimmer by George at the end. The pleats, again, need to go in a certain direction, and there's arrows on your instructions that will show this. So I'll go down the first line, and then I'll stop the machine. This is along the left edge, and you're going to need to finger press those pleats in a direction that is not natural to the way it was sewn. So we're going to force those pleats down that direction. And now that we're turning a corner, this first pleat here, we're going to want it to be going in that direction. But then after that, you're going to just let as it stitches across the bottom, let the final pleat go in the direction that it naturally wants to go. So this one, we're going to have it stitched that way, and then we are done. There's one more final step, and that is doing some quilting stitches up here in this other section. For step 31, we're going to have our accent thread in the needle and the bobbin, and the machine will sew the final quilting. going to want to make sure that this pleat has that tape under there to hold it down in place in order to get it to turn out properly. Alright, so we are finished with our Day at the Beach and the Burbs block. That'll give you a nice demonstration of how to do both blocks and the combo block. So we hope you enjoy making this.